to Science in Real Life. I'm Molly, and we're at the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University with Robin Hopkins, who's an assistant professor of organismic and evolutionary biology, and Heather Briggs, who's a postdoctoral researcher in the Hopkins lab.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Robin studies how species form, specifically why and how individuals mate with their own species and not with other species.
That's right. So, for example, why humans don't mate with chimps, except I study it in plants.
Heather is studying how pollinators influence this process of plant mating, and the particular case they're looking at right now is amazing, so let's set the scene.
I study these two beautiful wildflowers. They're called Phlox, and they grow in Texas. They're really closely related, and they look really similar. So, throughout most of their range where they grow, they're separated from each other. But in some parts, they grow right together in the same population. And in these places, they can actually mate with each other and produce hybrids.
That's like when a horse mates with a donkey and produces a mule. So the mule itself is really strong, but it's sterile and can't make babies and pass on its genes.
So these two species also make hybrids that are sterile. They're really beautiful, but they can't reproduce. And so I study how they've evolved a way to stop mating with each other. And we think they do this by changing color. So where this species grows right next to this species, it's dark red. And where this species grows really far away from that species, it's this beautiful purple color. So we think that this evolution of flower color stopped the hybridization between these two species where they grow together.
So, how do they do that? Well, it turns out that pollinators move between flowers, and when they do this, they're moving pollen, which leads to plant reproduction. There are two pollinator behaviors that are really important for plant reproduction. One is preference, and the other is constancy. Now, preference is basically as it sounds. Maybe a pollinator really likes purple flowers and will only visit purple flowers. Constancy, on the other hand, is more about how pollinators are moving between flowers. In one example, maybe a pollinator is visiting a red flower, then a red flower, then a red flower, and then will move to purple, purple, purple. We would consider this pollinator to have high constancy, and this would reduce the chance of hybridization. In another case, a pollinator might move between a red, then a purple, red, purple, red, purple, and we would consider that pollinator to have very low constancy and probably would increase the chance of hybridization.
So how do we test these hypotheses?
Let's go watch some pollinators.
So these butterflies pollinate phlox?
That's right. These are the pipevine swallowtails, Batis philonor, and they're the major pollinator for both of the phlox species.
So we raise these butterflies here at the Arboretum from egg to adult butterfly, and we use them to do our behavioral experiments. So we're going to take some of these butterflies over to our floral arrays, and our undergraduate Sarah is going to help us grab some butterflies and bring them out.
Box of butterflies. Hi guys.
So this is an example of a floral array that we use to test pollinator behavior. So we place flowers from each species into these tubes, and we observe how the pollinators forage on these flowers. Now we're going to move into the tent and see how the pollinators perform, and we record the movements, for example, from red to red to red, or purple to purple to purple, red to purple, etc.
So you guys have done this experiment with hundreds of butterflies. Does the data support the hypothesis?
Turns out it does. These swallowtail butterflies have really high constancy. They go from a red to a red to a red flower, or a purple to a purple to a purple flower. So if we look here, we can see that when the two species are different colors, they don't hybridize as much as they would if they were the same color. And that's really good for the plants.
And this is a dynamic that we're seeing in action now, but how did the first red flowers evolve?
That's a really good question. So imagine a scenario where you have the two species growing together, they're the same color, and then one mutant red flower appears. And this plant produces far fewer hybrids than its purple counterpart. And so that plant makes more happy, fertile offspring. The next generation, there's more of these red flowers. And over time, you get the entire population with these beautiful dark red flowers.
But if the red flowers are doing so well, why aren't all of the flowers of that species red?
That's a great question. So this is where preference comes into play. So if you look at these data, you can see that the pollinators actually have a strong preference for the purple flower. So all things being equal, the pollinators want to visit the purple flowers.
So in areas where the two species coexist, it's advantageous to be red because pollinator constancy reduces hybridization. But in areas where the two species are separate, pollinator preference means it's better to be purple.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what's really exciting is that we've done these experiments in the wild and found that these native butterflies actually show the same behavior that we see in the lab.
That's amazing. So what are the next steps for this project?
So we're really interested in knowing more about the pollinator behavior. So we're exploring now whether this behavior is innate or learned.
So like nature versus nurture.
Exactly.
Robin and Heather, thank you so much for showing us the work you're doing right now. It is blowing my mind that pollinator behavior can have such a huge impact on plant evolution, and that it's something that we can see in action and measure in the lab.
Yeah, it's really cool. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for stopping by.
If you want to know more about their research, check out the link to the Hopkins Lab website in the description, and don't forget to subscribe to Science in Real Life. We'll see you next time. This episode was brought to you by the American Society of Plant Biologists.